Welcome, everyone, to our third Speech Spotlight Live. If you are new to the center, welcome. If you are more of a regular, welcome back. I am eager to dive into our discussion this afternoon. But first, I want to briefly mention the center's upcoming conference. By the way, I should introduce myself. I'm Michelle Deutschman. I'm the executive director of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. And our third annual Speech Matters Conference will be taking place virtually on April 20th and 21st from 10 to 12:30 PST each day. I'm going to miss meeting up with all of you at the University of California's UC-DC Center to network and nosh and learn. But our conversations will still be terrific. Our theme this year is charting the course for campus expression and engagement, and you can visit our website to register. So now back to today's topic. When the university speaks, what should it say? We know that colleges and universities are regularly called upon to speak about current events taking place both inside and outside of the campus. This summer, for instance, we saw a huge flurry of responses following the death of George Floyd, and then again following the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. The outpouring of statements from colleges and universities raised, not for the first time, questions like, should colleges and universities be speaking about events that happen in the world? And if yes, how do they decide when to speak and what to say? And then finally, and I would argue most importantly, how do universities move beyond words to actually taking action? We are very lucky this afternoon to have two extraordinary scholars and experts here with us to discuss these conundrums. Dr. Cerri Banks is Dean of Students and Vice President for Student Affairs at Skidmore College. She served in that role since August 2016. Previously, Dr. Banks served as Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Mount Holyoke College in South Hadley, Massachusetts, and as the Dean of William Smith College at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. In her role at Skidmore, Banks is responsible for the academic and social progress of students. She oversees 134 employees and all offices in student affairs, including athletics, campus life and engagement, health and wellness, residential life, career development, student diversity programs, and student academic services. I'm tired just thinking about it. She received her PhD in Cultural Foundations of Education and her Certificate of Advanced Studies in Women's Studies, both from Syracuse University, and specializes in the sociology of education, cultural studies, multicultural education, and qualitative research. And I can't help but mention how proud I am that she's also a current fellow at the UC Center. Dr. Sigal Ben-Porath is a professor of education at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Ben-Porath received her doctorate in political philosophy from Tel Aviv University in 2000. She was awarded 2 successive Tel Aviv University President's postdoctoral grants. Between 2001 and 2004, she was a postdoctoral research associate at the University Center for Human Values at Princeton University. She's been teaching at Penn Graduate School of Education since 2004. She's also an associate member of the Political Science Department and the Philosophy Department at Penn. She served as a special assistant to the university president and as chair of the Faculty Advisory Board to Penn Press. She's a board member of the Andrea Mitchell Center for Study of Democracy. 2012 and 13, she was affiliated with the Safra Center for Ethics at Tel Aviv University. And last year, she was a fellow in residence at the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard. Dr. Ben-Porath is interested in democratic theory, practice, and studies the ways that institutions like schools and colleges can sustain and advance democracy. Please feel free to enter questions into the Q&A, and we'll take those as we move through what I know will be a dynamic discussion. We have a lot to cover, and I think the best place for us to start is kind of like at the beginning, which is, I want to ask both of you, is it important for universities and colleges to use their voice to opine about things? And let's start about things happening outside the university. And Cerri, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, I'm happy to start. And welcome, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to present with my dear friend, Sigal Ben-Porath. We are both excited to be here today and excited to get to see each other. But I'll dive right in. Yes, colleges and universities should speak. You'll see that I have strong opinions about these things. But really, our institutions don't exist in a vacuum, right? We know that what is happening outside of our institutions has impact on our own campuses and climate. Social media, the 24/7 news cycle, all of these things have made what happens outside of our campus really hyper visible. We see things played over and over again, and we can't deny that constantly seeing a police officer's knee on George Floyd's neck and individuals reliving that event over and over again does not affect our campus community and climate. And we need to be aware of the ways that it does affect and how it may affect certain individuals on our campus disproportionately. One of our goals is to prepare students for effective and engaged citizenship in colleges where they practice critical thinking, decision-making, media literacy, engaging across differences, and how to put their own their own values into action. And they get to make mistakes while doing that. But we can't pretend like things like the recent murders of Asian Americans in Atlanta don't, again, impact our campus community. And we need to help students have those skills in order to navigate some of these challenges and to think about what they do when they go out into the world. And finally, what I'll say is that the university also represents legitimacy and it has power. So it is the place that we know creates knowledge and debunks myths. I believe it is our responsibility to speak out boldly and to do so publicly.
Thank you. Sigal, I'd love for you to share your perspective too.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, for having me here. And as is often the case with us, I agree with a lot of what Cerri has said. And I, rather than repeat it, I want to just situate the issue within the broader context of democratic politics and democratic theory. We owe the title of today's talk to my friend Corey Bretschneider's book, When the State Speaks, What Should It Say? And Corey says that the democratic, so he situates this issue, which I think both Cerri and I oftentimes do as well, within the context of protecting open expression. And here is how. Universities, because they are contexts in which knowledge is generated, as Cerri said at the end of her comments now, they are places where free speech or open expression has to be protected. And oftentimes we allow for diversity of views to be expressed within our boundaries, right, and within our membership. But at the same time, we still represent a specific set of values which we should not shy away from expressing. And these statements that universities are called on to make and are finding themselves making more and more are one of the ways in which universities and colleges are able to really represent these values while they are allowing the diversity of voices and perspectives to be to still take priority within their boundaries as part of the process of research and teaching and learning, etc., and making mistakes, as Cerri says. So Corey Bretschneider, in his book, he says, I just want to quote one quick sentence. He says, while the state should protect the rights of these groups that express hateful views, it also has a duty to make clear that it is not complicit in their opposition to the ideal of free and equal citizenship. The state should criticize discriminatory group and in the case of the most extreme hate groups, condemn them. But at the same time, Corey is saying it should criticize the discriminatory messages, right? And I think this is surely the case generally within a university or a college. Although, these are parallels, it doesn't mean that it's the very same thing, right? A state has a certain legal and other requirements that public universities have to follow in certain ways, and private institutions have to follow in different ways. But either way, we do not represent states, right? We represent institutions that operate within these legal boundaries. But we very broadly, I don't mean the three of us, I mean generally speaking, administrators and faculty people and students and staff. But we have a similar responsibility, right, to protect a broad array of views within our boundaries, and at the same time to represent the set of values that we stand for, values that include a commitment to expanding the boundaries of knowledge, but they also include a commitment to inclusion and non-discrimination. And we shouldn't be shy in our public statements to make the case for these values. So I just think that when the university speaks, this is the kind of thing that it should say.
Thank you. I think that framing is really helpful, because even though we're talking about sort of something sort of narrow, the truth is we're really talking about something very large in terms of the role of higher education and establishing democratic values. Now, I have a feeling that both of you are going to agree on a bunch of things today. And so I think it's important for us to start out with some arguments that other people make that maybe you can both respond to, because you're making a very interesting point, Sigal, that sometimes the university values might come into conflict with the array of messages, right, that exist. And that, we want to support speech. Now, there are a lot of scholars who argue that really the university needs to stay neutral, and that the reason that they have to stay neutral is because if they politicize, if they weigh into these political issues, they're going to chill speech and therefore diminish the exchange of ideas on campus. And so I'd like to ask either or both of you to sort of speak to those questions before we move into the nitty gritty of like how and when and why should universities say the things that they do.
So I can jump in here and just say that I think there is an important message to hear in this concern that you raised, Michelle. And this is really the message that says the university has a lot of power, not only just socially, as Cerri said, and surely we will go back to, but it also has a lot of power over its own employees, whether they are staff or faculty or students in different ways, right? And so when the university fails or refuses to stay neutral, right? So either fails or refuses to stay neutral about events in the world, about values, etc., then basically what it is saying is we are requesting that our members be quiet about views that do not represent the university. And I think we actually do that sometimes. And as institutions, we even sometimes go too far in supporting a certain perspective. And in doing that, silencing views that are actually legitimate views that maybe I don't hold, but I think it's fine if my colleagues hold, right? So the boundaries are sometimes very hard to draw, right? Of course, I want to oppose hate, but what do I do when some forms of hate are, unfortunately, in my view, quite mainstream in parts of the political world, right? So I either situate myself as an institution very squarely within one political camp, right? Or I try to figure out a way to straddle this line, right? And to really maintain a commitment either to neutrality, as you said, Michelle, or to an ecumenical embracement, sort of like embracing of the diversity of views and perspectives that are available on campus, and really try to only cut out extremist, violent, right? So I have to decide where, as an institution, I draw the line. And I just want to note that in my view, some lines are shared across diverse institutions, and some lines or some parts of this boundary that we draw in terms of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable are going to be unique to the specific institution. We mentioned already public and private, they have different boundaries legally. But also even the population we serve, I think it's reasonable to say that a large public serving mostly Hispanic population, UC Merced might have a certain boundaries that Skidmore might see differently, right? For various reasons, because of the population they serve, they might look to respond in different ways to different events. It doesn't mean that they have different values or that one place endorses, let's say, hatred and the other doesn't, right? But the specific boundaries are important here, and I'm sure Cerri has some comments here as well. Go ahead.
I'll just say a few quickly. I think when neutrality is used to disguise fear or desire to hide true feelings or to avoid conflict is where we run into trouble. I know that those are strong words, but I think that sometimes the working to remain neutral really has strong consequences for institutions, right? There could be a fear, there could be a lack of trust in the institution, and then also some despair. I don't think that neutrality is the answer to not chilling speech, right? We make all kinds of statements about our values. As Sigal said, we stand up for those values in all kinds of ways. But it seems like when it comes to things like racism, sexism, ability, social class and economic issues, that we have a harder time. And I think part of that is because there are so many constituents that the institution has to pay attention to for its survival. And so I think when that neutrality then in some ways can stunt the speech, as Sigal was saying, of marginalized groups, because then they don't know where the institution stands. And thus they start to question their place and their value on these really important and critical issues. We can help. We teach content and skills that no matter what your political belief, right, if you can think critically, you can speak across differences, you can do all of those things. I think getting back to the heart of what we do as an institution is important. I've helped students understand, for example, that they cannot refuse another student's right to start a club because they don't agree with their beliefs, right? That there needs to be more reasoning and some policies that help us look at that. I've been heartened by the way that students take this on, but I don't know that they should always have to take it on in the ways that they do. And that as institutions, we need to really pay attention to what we're doing so that our students don't have to take on this work to address what really are larger institutional challenges. I will add, I think that skills and strategies also can include ending participation in a conversation or a cause. And so I advise students all the time that their activism is really important and their fight is admirable, but they also get to make decisions that center self-care. And I'm thinking, Sigal, your comments about hate speech, right? They do get to decide that I am not going to participate in this event or conversation or dialogue or statement, right? Support a statement that doesn't acknowledge things for what they are.
No, that's great. I think it's always important to remember. I think sometimes people forget that the right to free speech isn't just the right to speak. It's also the right to not speak, which can be also very powerful. And I think what makes today's conversation interesting is what Sigal also said, is that there's so much line drawing and that there's no easy answer, right? If there was an easy answer, we wouldn't need an hour or 5 hours, right, to talk about this. And so I'd like to ask each of you, and maybe Cerri, you want to start on this one, is, when it's time, when everyone decides this is the moment that we'd like to say something, right? What questions should the institution be asking itself to determine, if and what they should say, right? And I know that in your work at Skidmore, you've had to deal with some of these things. So I don't know if you can share some thoughts, and then we'll go to Sigal. And I also want to tell people, I see all your excellent questions coming through the queue, okay? And we will get to it in a little bit.
Yes. So this is a really challenging thing, I think. Not every issue or conversation merits a response, but often on our campuses, folks want us to respond to every issue as it comes up, and it's nearly impossible, right? There are some patterns I've been noticing when issues come up. For example, the chain emails from folks external to our institutions that just say the same thing, and they just send them by the millions, it feels like, when you're getting them, usually about an issue that they don't know a lot about, or that they've heard that they believe is suppressing speech or discriminatory, or when sometimes it's our students working through their process, it's our institution making multiple decisions about different things. And I think that's the way media and social media sort of co-ops narratives before we even get to the point where we have been able to get some facts, do an examination, or work our way through our process or procedure. It brings to mind one incident a couple years ago now, in Saratoga. Someone had put KKK flyers out downtown in Saratoga. The town had a response. We had deans reach out to students that lived in the area. And we were at a moment where we were going through that conversation of how do we help our community understand that it's not just the president that responds, that we all respond. And we thought, well, it's off campus, it's not on campus. We've reached out to off-campus students. The dean did send a message, and yet people were not satisfied. And I kept saying, if you don't know where we stand on the KKK, then we failed you in so many ways, right? But what we learned is that if the email doesn't come from the president, that sometimes gets translated into, well, you must not care. And I think that's complicated. I think it's a cultural shift to try to move away from everything needing a large institutional message. But sadly, we have to, because it is impossible to respond to every single thing. And then what happens are these sort of, I feel like, culture wars. Well, you responded to this way, but you didn't respond to that. And no one ever sort of leaves satisfied. So I think the question is difficult. And I think that, again, as institutions, how are we thinking about the ways we demonstrate what our values are every day in our practice, policy, statements, programming, right? So that when these things arise, we have more space, and maybe there's a little more generosity to how we choose to respond. But Sigal, you might have a better answer than I do. I don't know what it is. I still think we did the right thing with the KKK flyers, but it was hard to know that folks did not find it satisfactory because they viewed only a message from the president would be addressing the issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd start exactly where you ended, Cerri, which is that to reach that level of generosity that you were looking for, what you need to do over time, you being an institution, right? What an institution needs to do over time is really to build trust with the students, and really to students and other members of the community. And really to give them the sense that the institution is looking to ensure that they know that they belong, right? And this is really, I think, the core issue here, because when you don't have the trust of the students, that they believe that you or Skidmore or whichever institution, right, actually opposes the KKK or doesn't look to propagate, whatever it might be. I mean, it's even funny to phrase it this way. If they are not recognizing the commitments of the institution, and they don't have the trust, then the problem is really bigger than whether the president said this or what is the specific phrasing of the statement, etc. And so I think, and sometimes, just to add to that, sometimes you have a small number of vocal students who refuse to acknowledge the trust, but in fact, a large part of the campus constituency is feeling that they can give you the time and they can let you investigate the specifics of the incident, whatever they might be, and that they can support the process because they can trust that you really care for them and you are committed to their well-being and that they are included in the institution. And I'm saying they, it's a really like just a broad, because this happens at the individual level, and sometimes there are small groups of students or clusters of students who don't feel that way, and so you have to look into that. And this is oftentimes the role of people like student life officers or administrators, university life people, sometimes residential life people. So it really depends on the specific context. But broadly speaking, the decision, Michelle, that you asked about in terms of like writing or delivering the message to the community, one of the challenges that I think is reflected in Cerri's example is that there are incidents that are known to a small group of students and are very painful to them. The KKK is an example, but this is, of course, outside of the campus. Sometimes there are events on campus that one group of students organizes. So there are 8 attendees, and then there are 4 people who are really mad about that. So there is some kind of clash that deserves our attention and causes a lot of pain and maybe reverberates, but is not common knowledge on campus. It's not a huge event. And sometimes one of the considerations that you might have is, am I amplifying a message of hate by countering it, right? So, of course, the KKK is not the example for that, but there are examples where you see a small group of students propagating some problematic message, and part of what you need to balance out is not only what you say and who says it, as Cerri you focused on, but also just even if you need to do something else rather than broadcasting a public statement that then exposes the entire campus to an incident that up until now was painful to a small group of students. So this is sort of just an additional consideration here.
I mean, I think there are so many considerations, and I think both of you highlighted a couple of big challenges. And, as someone who deals with expression issues every day, everybody being satisfied is unfortunately not a very common situation. And so that's very difficult. And I think you also mentioned this idea of generosity. I would suggest that the 24/7 news cycle isn't very generous. And so if you take too long to think about it, then you're complicit. But if you're too quick and you don't say the right thing, then people are not happy. And then I think the amplification is a really important point, which is, kind of like in Harry Potter, do you say the name of Voldemort or do you not? And when do you do it, right? I mean, I can give other examples, but I want to now talk about something about this idea. We've been talking about things sort of outside the campus. And one of my questions is balancing things that happen out in the world and things that happen inside your campus, right? So many, many, many colleges and universities made statements about after George Floyd's murder, right? But then students said, wait, but you're not taking care of the things that are happening inside our campus. And I don't know if you have thoughts about how to balance, those two things. Cerri?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's difficult, right? Because our campuses, there are errors that are made. Our diversity is real, right? There are people with all sorts of ideas and thoughts and backgrounds and identities and experiences. And sometimes it's difficult to manage all of those, right? Absent, as you said, the generosity, et cetera. And so I'll give you a couple of examples that I've used in the past. So there was at one college, there was an individual that had a Confederate flag in their car. And then at another college, there was a student that had a Pepe the Frog image in their window, their residence halls. And that image at the time, I don't know if it still is, had been used by the alt-right in some of their work. So as you can imagine, there was uproar. There were people calling for expulsion and firing. And so in both instances, there was a conversation about free speech and expression. There was a conversation with both individuals. One individual removed the item from the space because of the impact on the climate and the community. The other did not. And so what happened then was an extensive conversation about what free expression is and how you are able to engage when you see something or there's something that you feel is challenging, but is still free expression. One of the things I worry about often with students is the paralyzing nature of some of these things. And I think if we're not doing enough around helping them understand ideas around expression and that we value them, as Sigal was saying earlier, then that's when we find they're paralyzed to the point where a poster, they can't go to class for a week, or a person feels they can't be at work, and I think we have to move past that and help students to understand again the choices they get to make about free expression, but also that other people also can make those choices, and hopefully they will use that to inspire them right around their own activism and their ideas. I think that when you talk about, I just lost my thought.
That's okay. We'll come back.
We'll come back to it.
We actually, if it's okay, someone in the queue says, Stephen has a question that I think actually pulls on this, which is, statements are one piece of the puzzle, but then there's the question of what do you do after you make your statement? And, Stephen's question asks about whether public and private colleges and universities have a duty akin to affirmative action generally, to reach out and invite speakers, organize conferences, create courses which give voice to marginalized voices which are otherwise deemed controversial or offensive in wider society. So I'm going to ask both of you to speak to that. And then Cerri, I don't know if you want to address that also from your role as an administrator, because I imagine that is a challenging place to be.
Yeah, so I remembered what I was getting ready to, and thank you, Stephen, for your question, because it ties right in. The long and short answer is yes, right? Are we paying attention to who it is we're bringing to our campus, who's being represented, and what messages they are sharing? I'm not sure the affirmative action piece. I do think that it is it is to the benefit of an institution, right, to bring individuals a range of ideas that represent a range of ideas in. Getting back to what I was saying about the strategies around speech and free speech and learning how to engage across differences. So what I was going to mention earlier is a program that we started at Skidmore, which is how I met Sigal, called Skidmore Speaks. And it was about just that, right? So we had a range of speakers representing a range of ideas. We had some workshops, we had some skill building sets to help students understand the First Amendment, because there's, first of all, not an understanding often of what that means. Talk about things like hate speech. We had a young African-American alum from Williams who came to talk to us about starting a club at his campus on bringing controversial speakers to campus and what that was like. Scott Jasek from Inside Higher Ed, just talking about what they were hearing. And it was for faculty, staff, and students. We were able to see the benefits of that the very next semester when a speaker was invited to campus that some deemed controversial. And the students just engaged with her beautifully. A student had sent out a message early on saying, we're not going to shout this person down. We're going to listen respectfully, and then we're going to debate these ideas. And that's exactly what happened. The challenge is, of course, I always say every 4 years, a whole new group comes in. And so how do you build these into the institution and these skill sets and this type of programming in, so that year after year, students are able to engage and practice these skills?
Great. Sigal, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say that I think in one way, what Stephen was asking in his question about, affirmative action and the conversations that colleges and universities are looking to have. I think in one way, the parallel, so it's not a full parallel, but there is one aspect here which actually is pertinent to our work in some ways. And that is really, and I think Cerri noted that, the centrality of diversity to our work, and diversity in all senses, right? We need people with diverse identities, diverse experiences, diverse opinions and views, diverse ideologies. And it's very hard for us to, represent something that is not there. Right. It's very hard for an instructor. I'll give you an example from even like just my courses. I teach at the ed school at Penn, and ed schools generally tend to lean more progressive. This is the kind of students that we get, and a lot of people who are trained to be teachers or education researchers. Obviously, it's an generalization, right? But the median person tends to be more progressive. And so sometimes when I teach, for example, about an important policy, like about charter school policies, or when I teach about religious expression in schools, I'm very excited when I have more voices in my class that go against the grain of the common view in my classes that basically is, takes a certain approach to these policies, right? A more progressive approach. So I think it's easier for the university to operate as an institution that allows for students to challenge their own preconceptions, to reconsider their beliefs, even if they're not going to change them, right? But just so that they are not dogmatic in their mind, so that they consider and then even continue to endorse the same views. They need to encounter people with different views, people with different experiences and identities, etc. And so my sense is that universities do have maybe not a duty, but definitely do better when they are able to support the representation of diverse views. And sometimes, as I started off by saying, these official statements that we make as institutions, we condemn this, or we stand for that, or, as an institution, we always care about the other thing. These are statements that are meant oftentimes to balance out either something that happened in the world, such as a hatred, murder, like the examples we already mentioned, and sometimes to balance out something that happened on campus. And these statements go along with, or should go along with, inviting speakers that can represent views that are underrepresented, or supporting opportunities for students to engage with particular actions and expression that they wouldn't otherwise, sometimes sponsoring certain activities. So other actions beyond our words. Yes.
No, I think both of you are really highlighting this idea of what's going on in this conversation really needs to be institutionalized, both in terms of how and when the statements are made, but more importantly, giving students and other stakeholders, right, the skill set to learn how to respond also, which of course is one of the things the center aims to do, right, where this is just not something happens and we respond. It's about how do we integrate this, into our daily life in a proactive way. Now, of course, when universities and others speak, you often receive counter speech. And Amy has asked a really good question about this idea of how do you balance speaking up for social justice and equity issues against concerns that those views won't be kind of well received, whether it's by donors or stakeholders or legislatures. And I'm even going to go a step farther and say what happens when there's, kind of real pushback. And I don't know if you can share from your experiences.
Yeah, I thought your use of counter speech was very polite, Michelle. When the emails come in,
I try
counter speech, not just counter speech. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the struggle, right? And so there are a range of constituents that our universities and colleges are responsible and responsive to. And again, there's a diversity of ideas and opinions related to that. I think that's where an institution, and particularly its leadership, has to go back to the values of the institution, right? We have stated values around equity, around justice. We have an entire community of people that represent a range of experiences, lives, and identities that are all allowed to live their full humanity and not have to deal with hate or harm, right? And if we truly believe that, then it might mean we lose a donor. And I've worked for presidents that have said we might lose that donor, but we make the commitment to these values because they're important to us. We make the commitment to free expression and, individuals' right to have free expression and to exercise that on our campuses for faculty in their publication and scholarship and writing and so on. So I think that's when, again, those values being a part of what you do all the time, not just some of the time. And I have found in conversations when I've had with parents, for example, or with alums, when we go back to that value statement and we combine that with, the public narrative is most often limited in when it comes to facts and what's really happening, that folks are reasonable about that, even if they disagree with the stance.
Just to expand on one point that, Cerri, that you were saying in terms of the value statement or the mission statement of the institution, I think beyond the issue of inclusion and fairness that we definitely stand for, and beyond even the fact that when we offer an admissions, when we make an admissions offer to students, we do either implicitly or in so many words tell them, you are welcome here, you belong here, we value your opinion, we would like to hear your thoughts, right? And so if we don't live up to that, this is really a failure on us as an institution. But I just want to add to that as well, that given that as institutions, we really also stand for truth and for the expansion of knowledge, these create additional boundaries that sometimes clash with either public preferences, our legislatures' wishes, some alum or other supporters' preferences. And this is something that we just have to learn to operate with. I know it's very hard. I'm, living that as well. But, if you have a legislature or some alum, for example, who are critical of the accepted scientific view regarding climate, for example. And so you have a pressure to avoid statements about climate change, or even to hold conferences on climate that would have a balanced view, meaning inviting some people who deny the reality of climate change. I don't think this is something that we have to necessarily, go with or accept. And sometimes we would say, look, here is a person and they deny this scientific consensus and the reality of climate change. We are going to support their invitation because somebody invited them, or because this is educational for our students who need to understand how to really deal with this line of argument. But this is not what we support. This is not what we, let's say, the Department of Meteorology or the School of Arts and Sciences or whoever, this is not a view that we endorse. right? This is a view that we are just looking to expose you to, but we are, because we support free speech or for other reasons, but we're not going to promote it. And so this is a part of this sort of like path that we need to chart in regards to blowbacks that we sometimes get.
One thing I wanted to add to that too was within our own institution, sort of paying attention to our constituents and the impact around free expression, right? And so our faculty have particular protections around academic freedom. Our students have protections around our expectations for them and our space to allow them to learn and grow. It is often our staff who feel the most compressed, right? Who are afraid at times of if they speak out and say things that they feel are part of their free expression, but they don't know how they will be supported by the institution. I think we have to keep that in mind as we talk about things that happen outside, but right in our own institution, there are often individuals who feel they cannot share their beliefs publicly or their ideas publicly, or even ask questions, right? Because of that blowback that can occur from other constituents in campus. I think it gets to, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, that call out culture and what happens, right? When you make a statement and then all of a sudden your statement becomes the statement of the week that's all over media and you're attacked in particular ways. And so I think we have to keep that in mind as we're talking about this free expression and who gets to express right in our own institution.
Now, I'm really happy that you raised that, especially because of the people participating today. Many of them are staff and administration from universities, and I'm sure they feel like you are really speaking to them. Jason, Hallie had a really interesting question that came in that I wanted to mention is, we want to make sure when we talk about speech, right, it's not just limited to words. And he asked an interesting question about the images that universities use. And I wondered if you wanted to speak at all to that and sort of that question of how we decide what images we want, whether it's in our marketing materials or in our messaging to internal or external constituencies.
Right. So just generally speaking, we have to remember that when the university speaks, it speaks in many voices, right? And so it oftentimes has various departments and units and individuals, some of whom are speaking in the, representing the university really formally, whether it's going to be in a commencement or graduation materials, who do we honor with a degree, or definitely the photos and images that we put on our website and on other materials. All of these really are more formally representing the voice of the university, right? And I think it's very important to keep in mind some of the ethical challenges here. And one of the most common ones really is the use of images of people from visibly diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, and sometimes also diverse abilities if it's a visible difference, right? And oftentimes we look to use these images, right, to project a certain vision of the university. And I think this is, in some ways, an important use of the university's, sort of a space and attention that it can get. But it also can portray the university in a misleading way. Right. So, if I'm looking at myself as a woman looking to join an institution, and from their materials, I think there are other women there, or that is that I'm not going to stand out. But then I go there, and it turns out that it actually has a very small minority of women, and of course is a more common when it happens with racial minorities. Right, then basically, I was fooled, right? I feel like maybe this is not what I signed up for. And if the institution is not making efforts to make sure that I really do belong within the institution despite my minority status as a woman, or for other people as racial minorities, then I think we are projecting a false image, right? On the other hand, if you don't put a woman on the brochure, maybe no women will come. And if you want them to come, so there's the concern here.
And I know it probably sounds repetitive at this point, but I think this gets back to the point we've been making all along, right? That these sort of issues by themselves represent one thing, right? But if we have not, and I always call on my dear friend and mentor, Daryl Smith, who wrote Diversity's Promise for Higher Education, and she talks about infusing our diversity work into our institutions the way we did technology, right? There was a time we didn't have computers, and we wouldn't think of living without them now, that they're a part of everything we do across the institution. And it's still hard for our colleges and universities to do that, right? And so I think the challenge is if you have one message where you're saying we value you, we want you here, and then we're silent on really critical issues, or even worse, we put out statements that don't call racism or don't address violence and harm. And then, on the other hand, we want to put your picture in the magazine and display there. That is not, it's not going to work, right? We are not, and the goal isn't that everyone will be happy and satisfied all the time. I think the goal is that we've established enough trust and transparency that people say, okay, I don't agree with that, but I know at this institution, this is an important value, and I can see how that matters in someone else's life, or for someone else that's a constituent here, or in thinking about what we need to do to move forward. So, and I know Sigal feels the same way. We don't propose there are any simple answers to that. There just aren't. But again, if our goal is everybody's happy all the time, that's not going to happen. And so if we're also straddling that at our institution and as institutional leaders, then we are going to fail, right? Because of the sort of opposite stances that often individuals take. I think if we could spend more time in that middle gray, right, and the places that overlap, that we could probably be more successful in managing these moments and statements and all of these things on our campuses.
I think one of the things that I always find so fascinating about this topic, but all of the topics that the center focuses on, is that in the end, it really comes down to the same words come up each time, which is belonging and trust and transparency and truth, kind of no matter what we're talking about. And these are very elusive and hard to achieve, things. And by the way, if either of you knows of a job where everybody's happy all the time, I'll sign up. They say time flies when you're having fun. It's hard for me to believe that we only have 5 minutes left. And so I think what I'd like to do is just give each of you a chance to share anything on this or related topic. There are some questions in the queue about how to sort of manage this polarity between free speech and protecting people from attacks on human dignity. I want to open it up for you each to have a minute or two to speak to, whether it's the group or a particular part of the group on this or a kind of a related issue. And Sigal, do you want to go ahead and then?
Yeah, I'll go ahead so that I can give Cerri the last word. I just want to recognize that even as you noted, Michelle, that a lot of these conversations go back to the same core ideas. We do face an additional challenge in this time because of the pandemic. And I think the fact that a lot of our interactions are virtual, as we do here, even campuses that are in person this semester are oftentimes holding many of their classes and activities online. Many of their clubs are not allowed to meet in person, or their activities are limited. And so my sense is that a lot of this trust that we are looking to build, and a lot of this social connection that we are looking to rely on for a sense of belonging and for addressing or maybe preventing some of these concerns from arising on our campuses, is just even harder to do when we are doing all of our interaction or most of our interaction virtually. And I actually see some real difference between people who are freshmen now and people who are sophomores and were freshmen last year and still had some of this interaction in person. There is a lot of mental health burden that everyone carries, right? And if you didn't have the opportunity to build your networks and to have your friends and your connections and to connect with administrators in person, with instructors, etc., then it's just harder for you to have this trust and the sense of belonging. And I think some of the messaging that we offer as institutions really has to be transparent about that and to give students hope that what they are experiencing now, hopefully is not going to be what they experience later, and that really the university is committed to supporting a more robust context in which they can see themselves as belonging.
Thank you. Cerri.
Thank you, Sigal. I think I would add to that. Thank you for bringing up the pandemic, right? I think acknowledging that our students, our faculty, our staff, folks are really fatigued. This has taken its toll in all kinds of ways, in addition to the larger national and on our campuses context with issues that we're dealing with. So I would add, Michelle, to that list of words you gave earlier: boldness, integrity, courage, right, and ongoing. Like, this work is not something that we check the box off because we read the right book and, went to the right dialogue and held the right forum, and so we're okay. This is the lives of human beings. And so even simple things, I've been thinking a lot about communications, right? Our students, for example, say, you write long emails, we don't read them, and we just keep writing long emails, right? Our students keep saying we need action, not just forums, right? Where everyone sort of emotes and then we go back to, and we can't seem to get those right. So I think as institutions, I tend to be a systems thinker. I think we have to look at our systems, look at what we're doing, and see where our values lay up against our policies, practices, messages, statements. And then I think we can ask for the generosity of our community as we try to work through the operational pieces of when we make a statement, what we say in the statement, and how. But I don't think we can ask for that generosity if we haven't done that work, and that is up to the leadership. And I include myself in that.
Well, I think I'm going to end on this word ongoing, because it's ongoing individually. It's certainly ongoing. That's what the center aims to do. I want to thank both of you, not only lucky participants who got to listen to your expertise, but it's such a privilege for me to be in conversation with two such not just amazing scholars, but wonderful people. We will do a follow-up email that will include any resources that Cerri or Sigal have. I'm going to give a little plug. They both have books that are going to be forthcoming in the near recent and upcoming future, and we will look forward to continuing the learning with them. There's no Speech Spotlight Live next month because we're having the Speech Matters Conference. Please do sign up, even if you can't join for all of it. And I look forward to being in touch. I want to wish people a happy and healthy spring and just a safe time until we meet again. Thank you so much.